and welcome to another edition of On Air with WorldAware. Today we have with us leading food expert Dr. Gary Weber, who is going to talk to us about produce safety and the future of produce safety. Gary?
Thank you, Catherine. I'm the Senior Director of Food Safety and Contamination Prevention with WorldAware. In my career, I've worked for USDA, the FDA, and the private sector. Most recently, I contributed to efforts to enhance produce growers' compliance with the produce safety rule through enhancing their ability to participate in the on-farm readiness review program. I also served as the prevention manager for the FDA Coordinated Outbreak Response and Evaluation Network, also known as CORE. There I provided leadership for the signals and surveillance approaches to detecting foodborne illness more rapidly and post-response prevention efforts. Some of the key points that I wanted to raise during this webinar include elements of the discussion that have not been prominently discussed in reports that I have seen, and I wanted to share them with you for your consideration. We know that weather events are often found preceding food safety events linked to produce. We know that an unusual weather event occurred weeks prior to contaminated produce being shipped from Arizona, including cold temperatures and high winds. We know that beef and dairy cattle operations are known sources of E. coli 0157H7 and other STEC pathogens. The FDA identified the illness-causing strain involved in the Romaine Lettuce Outbreak, an E. coli 0157H7, in the Wellton Canal, adjacent to the 100,000 head cattle feedlot south of the produce growing areas. Scientific studies show wind events cause dust from cattle operations to move significant distances, potentially carrying pathogens. We also know that routine testing of produce fields prior to harvest as a harvest release criteria did not detect the contamination that must have been present in the romaine when it was processed. We also know from scientific analysis that processing romaine, chopping it, for instance, and bagging it, increases opportunities for pathogens to grow, especially if temperatures exceed 40 degrees during their transport to distribution centers or retail. Prevention efforts focused on understanding these areas will reduce the risk of human illness, product recalls, or loss of consumer confidence. Let's take a quick look at the 2017 illness incidence and trends in the United States. During 2017, there were nearly 25,000 cases of infections, over 5,600 hospitalizations, and 122 deaths. In comparison, during the 2014 to 2016 time period, the 2017 data indicates an increase in Cyclospora infections, Yersinia, Vibrio, STEC, Listeria, and Campylobacter. Cyclospora, STEC, and Listeria are common causes of foodborne illness associated with produce. In particular, let's look at the 2018 outbreak of E. coli 0157H7 attributed to romaine in the United States. This is the largest produce outbreak in the US since the 2006 spinach outbreak. In this 2018 outbreak, there were 210 illnesses in 36 states, compared to 199 illnesses in the 2006 spinach outbreak. In the 2018 outbreak, there were 96 people hospitalized and 27 developed hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is the most severe result of E. coli infections due to STECs. This is compared with 102 hospitalized and 31 who developed hemolytic uremic syndrome in 2006. 5 deaths were reported in 2018 compared to 3 deaths in 2006. So this outbreak was of very great concern because so much has been done to prevent this type of an outbreak since the 2006 event. And this is why I thought it was important to share with you some of my observations, having worked on produce safety and other food safety events for a number of years. The FDA response to the romaine lettuce outbreak was appropriate. In 2018, they conducted an environmental assessment after the outbreak. They identified the illness-causing strain of E. coli 0157H7 in the Wellton Canal, adjacent to a 100,000 head cattle feedlot south of the produce growing areas. Then in 2019, FDA conducted a romaine lettuce sampling assignment in Arizona. Sampling occurred at chilling locations and aggregating locations prior to shipment of the product for processing. At this aggregation point, if contaminated products were identified, they could be traced quickly to the farms of origin and no product would then be allowed to enter commerce. The FDA collected and tested 118 samples for each pathogen. They did not detect salmonella in any samples. They reported that they did detect one Shiga toxin producing E. coli STEC in a single sample. Further analysis suggested that that bacteria strain was not pathogenic. So it leaves us at this question: is the cattle feedlot at Wellton, Arizona a source of STEC bacteria? So let's consider the approaches that we can take to ensure the safety of leafy greens. The safety of leafy greens, and romaine in particular, is linked to a farm-to-table awareness of factors influencing contamination and growth of pathogens like E. coli 157H7 and other Shiga toxin-producing strains. The FDA Produce Safety Rule, the Preventive Controls Rule for human and animal food, and sanitary transport rules will all contribute to produce safety. In addition, industry best practices are continuously being updated, and they are contributing to improvements in produce safety. The FDA Produce Safety Rule and industry best practices, the key focus of all of these are listed in this comprehensive list below. Not to go through all of them in depth, but it starts with employee health and hygiene and of course training, all the way through dealing with setbacks from livestock operations and intrusion of wildlife, to pre-harvest, harvest, and post-harvest training for workers, sanitation, and water testing. This initiative also requires that there be some level of evaluation of food defense and intentional adulteration risks. The important steps to maintain the safety of produce include: we have to prevent the microbial contamination of produce as soon as possible. We need to evaluate the use of PCR testing as a field release criteria. We need to control the risk of microbiological contamination and cross-contamination during the chilling of harvested produce. We need to monitor and control the temperature of produce as it is aggregated and shipped to processors. We also need to monitor and control the temperature of produce post-processing and during shipment to distribution centers, food service, and retail establishments. Let's take a quick look at the Preventive Controls Rule for human and animal food and how it affects produce safety. At the processing level, firms are subject to the PC rule, and this rule requires a hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls focus. The supply chain controls contribute to produce safety, including verifying certificates of analysis, shipping systems that can comply with FDA sanitary transport rule, and the temperature of produce during shipment. The PC rule also requires a food safety plan, a traceability and recall plan, extensive employee training, preventive controls, and records of corrective actions taken in context of these preventive controls. Sanitation, allergen cross-contact control if applicable, and again, the food defense and intentional adulteration risk mitigation steps. In summary, at many steps from the farm to the table, risk can be amplified or mitigated by the focus on prevention. In this case, at each step, well-known science-based actions can reduce the food safety risk to consumers, as well as reduce the number of product recalls. Thank you for your attention, and I'll turn this back over to Catherine.
Thank you, Gary, for those valuable insights into produce safety. I'm sure that our listeners will gain valuable takeaways on this important subject. If you have any questions or comments or need additional assistance, please contact us at info@worldaware.com. Thank you.